Welcome to Terror in Tandem, a podcast about finding entertainment in the macabre. Hosted by the knowledgeable and lovable Laura and Richard Mathiasen. Each episode, we discuss the horror genre, from books to film to TV and beyond. Sometimes even from the beyond. You can find us at terrorintandem.com and on Instagram at terrorintandem.
Hi.
Boy, I got a lot of marbles in my mouth this morning.
I don't know what you're talking about. I was just going to say, oh, the joy of getting things right the first time.
It's a perfect example of perfection.
Yes.
Perfection personified.
Perfectly said.
So it's really interesting because this is we're starting to go into spring, awakening, if you will. You know, we're really opening up over here.
Yeah, we're
blossoming into who we were meant to be.
That's right.
Both in the nature of it all and in our internal nature.
And the petals of my personality unfurl.
Exactly. Like you are coming into your own, as it were, which is why this is a perfect time to talk about our episode topic, coming to their own.
Yeah.
As evil serial killers.
One might call the chrysalis or pupa.
Exactly. It's a spring awakening of serial killing.
Yay!
Welcome.
Human monsters.
So glad you figured out who you're meant to be.
A killer.
So I just wanted to start out by saying...
This episode is about serial killers and stuff?
This episode is about serial killers. But I wanted to start out by saying, you know... It's a fascination. It's a fascination shared by many people.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we're doing a whole episode on it.
I mean, it's why do you think that people are so fascinated by serial killers and serial killing and killing in like serialized fashion?
What an organic
and watching
setup.
Serialized things being serialized about serials.
You're definitely right. So, I mean, the elephant being murdered in the room is that serial killers and real crime, true crime, quote unquote, it's all the rage. It's everywhere. It's not even, I feel at this point it has transcended the horror genre to just become part of mainstream pop culture. Even some of the more hardcore stuff, honestly. But I think there's a couple of different ways to approach that question. It's pretty obvious that fascination with murder and violence and death and serial killers, it's pretty common. You know, it's like the sweet old lady that you work with in the office like totally watches true crime shows and murder mysteries and shit like that. Like, you know, my grandma watched Matlock and Murder, She Wrote and all that. And
Bones.
Yeah. Oh, forgot. For
I mean,
sure.
I don't know if that
sure.
was about serial killers more than it was about autopsies.
I think it was just about bones. It was just about like ossified bones.
It's like, look at this femur.
Every episode was Emily Deschanel and David Boreanaz just being like, check out these bones.
Weren't one of their names Bones? I think, or was it a nickname they called Dr. Bones?
I don't know. I've never seen it.
I feel like there's a XXX film about
Dr.
something called
Bones?
Dr. Bones.
I know. Come on. It's Bones. Anyway, so
the Dr.
like
Bones, like the doctor's in.
The answer you're going to get is like, it really just depends on what your worldview or your perspective on humanity. You could give this cynical answer, which I don't ascribe to, which is humanity is terrible. And we are obsessed with things because we've turned ourselves away from morality or God or whatever is upsetting you. I think it is a mixture of the scientific and the psychological. I think because we evolved from primates who had embedded in them a prey instinct, meaning it's perfectly natural and actually instinctual for us to seek out predators, learn everything that we can about them, who they are, where they are, why they do, what they're doing it, how they do it, as a way to inform ourselves and protect ourselves. Now, when you live in a modern society and you are living in relative safety, or at least the promise of safety, You're not running away from saber-tooth tigers or an attacking tribe next door. You monitor the predators that exist around you, which are serial killers.
Well, I also think it has a lot to do with the knowledge is power piece. So
Absolutely.
learning and, education really is controlled practice. So you can control how much you learn about a subject or not. It's about control, understanding, so that you feel like you have a little bit of control over, what is uncontrollable, which is the desire for these folks
that
to
they
kill.
Exist at all. Yeah, you can't control whether or not they exist.
You can't control whether or not they kill, or, you can't necessarily control if you were going to be a victim at some point. But I think it helps, especially women. Women are really a big listener of, reader of, viewer of serial killer and, mass murder type.
You've definitely touched on a couple of things there. That's the first thing you said. That is certainly part of the psychological aspect. Not only is that instinct hardwired into our brains out of a biological imperative to survive, but there is a psychological catharsis, or at least peace of mind, to be had when you're living in, what can be a very scary world, to learn about your enemy, the dark side of humanity, the things that might possibly threaten you. The other thing you said, which is really interesting, is it's pretty obvious that true crime, whether it's in podcast form or in shows like You, or but that's not a true crime show, but that sort of stalking male villain, they're extremely popular with women because that is a very universal and ubiquitous constant fear of most women: being accosted, being attacked, being abducted, being overpowered. So there is that sort of, I think, very human instinct to fly close to the sun. So what threatens us? What is a threat to us? And how close can we get to this thing without hurting ourselves? Which is the other side of the psychological, is we all exist on a spectrum. Without darkness, there is no light. This, consuming it in pop culture, is I think for most, a healthy way to satisfy an innate curiosity that can be on the morbid side.
What a shared sort of trait that people who are really interested in the world of true crime and serial killing and the actual motivations behind serial killers itself. It's obsession. It's,
yes,
it's almost like a passion.
Well, here's the thing I want to say as the co-host of a horror-themed podcast. I think we can all tell the difference between healthy curiosity and obsession. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
There's a big, big difference between writing love letters to actual killers in prison and looking them up or being interested.
Reading those letters.
Yeah, honestly, reading them after they're published.
Well, let's get into a little bit of the more technical legal definitions behind serial murder. So, according to the FBI.gov's definition of serial murder,
did you Google this from home, by the way? Just want to say we're doing research for a podcast here. Any recent search histories are for educational purposes.
Oh, right. Yeah. Shit. So the division of the FBI called the Behavioral Assessment Unit, or the BAU.
The BAU.
They define serial murder as the unlawful killing of two or more victims by the same offenders in separate events.
Right. Because if it's at the same event, it's a mass killing.
Right.
Yeah.
Previous definition of serial murder specified a certain number of murders varying from 2 to 10. This quantitative requirement distinguishes serial murder from other categories of murder, like single, double, or triple murder.
Yeah, or like a rampage or a random terrorist type thing. Yeah,
most of the definitions also required a period of time between the murders.
Right. Yeah.
This break in time was necessary to distinguish between a mass murder, like you mentioned, and a serial murder. Serial murders require a temporal separation between the different murders, which is described as separate occasions, a cooling off period, and an emotional cooling off period.
Cooling off. I mean, just like going to the gym, you gotta cool down after.
You gotta
murder.
stretch.
Yeah. Oh my God.
The term serial killing means a series of 3 or more killings, not less than one of which was committed within the U.S., having common characteristics to suggest the reasonable possibility that crimes were committed by the same person. So why don't we talk about, I think what we should explain in this episode is that we're going to talk about some fictional serial killers as represented in different mediums.
Yeah, like ones that
they're not based on real people.
They might be inspired by real things. No, you're talking totally fictitious creations. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And then we're going to talk also about real serial killers that are represented in fictional media.
Yeah. And in no way should any of this be interpreted as glorification, because fuck these people. But these are things that happened, and I think it's perfectly fine to be interested in them.
Yes.
Which we are.
So,
screw you for judging me.
Let's talk about some fictional serial killers.
Let's do it.
I wanted to jump into sort of some books to film adaptations, because there are many.
Okay.
So my first is Red Dragon and The Silence of the Lambs. So Red Dragon was written in 1981 and The Silence of the Lambs was written in 1988 by Thomas Harris.
We have discussed him previously.
We have. 1991, The Silence of the Lambs, starring Anthony Hopkins and Jodie Foster, was based on the 1988 book. And the another film, Red Dragon, came out in 2002, starring Edward Norton and Anthony Hopkins. So the book Silence of the Lambs is a serial murderer known as Buffalo Bill. He's stalking women. Clarice Sterling is a young trainee from the FBI Academy, and she's asked to, work with the BAU to interview Hannibal Lecter, Hannibal the Cannibal, who is under very secure prison sentence in Baltimore State Hospital for the criminally insane.
Yeah, he's got that glass, like plexiglass prison cell. It's always, I love scenes like this when they're on their way to meet the criminal and the guy's going through all the absurd rules you have to follow in order to interact,
and unlocking all of the doors.
Yeah, and it just makes it so much scarier. Yeah. You're like, don't approach him. Don't look him in the eyes. Yeah, don't wear perfume. Pass anything through at the same time.
Don't show any skin.
Yeah, like what he might do to
personal.
You.
Yeah,
the implication of what might happen to you bodily if you violate any of these rules makes it so much scarier. I love it.
Red Dragon is primarily focused on the FBI agent Will Graham, who basically risked everything to capture Hannibal Lecter, and he now is investigating a pattern of a new killer called the Tooth Fairy, and he has to work with Dr. Lecter in order to capture him. So one of the things I wanted to mention about this is that there was another film in 1986 called Manhunter, starring Brian Cox and William Peterson as Will Graham. Brian Cox played Hannibal Lecter.
That's the one that I really wanted to talk about.
Go for it.
As soon as you mentioned Red Dragon, I was like, yeah, but. So Red Dragon is the second adaptation of Red Dragon, the one that came out in 2002. It was directed by Brett Ratner.
Correct.
And it's really, really well cast Philip Seymour Hoffman is in it. Ralph Fiennes is excellent as Francis Dolarhyde. It's Brett Ratner. He's not a good director, and he's not a good person. But it's kind of stinks. The original from 1986, Manhunter, was directed by Michael Mann, and this is Miami Vice era Michael Mann.
Yeah.
And
Brian Cox as Hannibal Lecter.
Yes. So we've got...
who played it very different than Anthony Hopkins, but...
Yeah, we have a very...
Very chillingly.
Yes. So Manhunter, like you said, it's got William Peterson as Will Graham. It's got Brian Cox playing Hannibal Lecter in a very short role. It's really, Anthony Hopkins very famously won an Academy Award for, I think, the shortest amount of screen time. I think Brian Cox is even in this movie for shorter time. But Francis Dolarhyde in Manhunter is played by the incredible Tom Noonan, who fans of any horror movie, but specifically like Monster Squad or House of the Devil, he's really tall. You would recognize him if you saw him. He plays Francis Dolarhyde, the Tooth Fairy. And it's not as faithful to the book as Red Dragon was, but it's a much superior movie. Michael Mann really knows how to deliver a tight thriller. A young William Peterson before CSI, is Will Graham, so that's pretty cool. Stephen Lang is in it as, in the 80s. Joan Allen is in it, young Joan Allen. It's really cool to see all of these very famous, well-established actors in 1986 when they were, much, much younger. But you're right about Brian Cox's Hannibal Lecter. So where Anthony Hopkins played Hannibal Lecter as sort of playful, and Mads Mikkelsen played him as, like this sensual manipulator, Brian Cox played him like this disdainful creature who just viewed himself as above humanity, viewed humanity as, you could tell, like, even talking to other people pained him because he felt himself so much above them. So he had this languorous delivery that was just sort of like greasy. It was weird. And, it was very menacing, creepy, and a slow kind of drawl to his speech where he felt completely in control of everything. And like the way he interacted with other people was like the way a god might interact with a person, like, you're all ants to me. So it's definitely worth a watch. If you're going to watch one interpretation of Red Dragon, make it Manhunter.
Well, I think you could probably track the entire trajectory of the character of Hannibal. You can watch Hannibal Rising, which from 2007.
Yeah, the late
directed by Peter Weber.
Gaspard Ulliel was a young Hannibal Lecter. Yeah,
and it really shows his emergence into this world of killing,
and his early life in Lithuania as well.
Absolutely,
which is not really talked about very much in the movie versions.
And then you can watch Manhunter and Red Dragon.
They're all worth a watch.
And then you can watch The Silence of the Lambs, or read those, because those all, Thomas Harris has the 3 books. You can read the 3 books. You can watch the 4 films and really get a full picture of this fictional Hannibal Lecter character.
Now, you mentioned fictional killers based on real people, and this is one of them. So Thomas Harris, very famously, he was a crime journalist for years, starting in the 60s, before he started as a novelist. Now, Francis Dolarhyde, a.k.a. the Tooth Fairy, is kind of based loosely on the BTK killer.
Yes. So he does, in his works, refer to real serial killers.
Yes.
But Hannibal Lecter is truly fictional. He's not based off of anybody.
Well, he is kind of based on we talked about it in a previous episode when
a Mexican serial killer.
Yes, the Mexican. But you're absolutely right in that that's only the barest foundation of Hannibal Lecter. Who Hannibal Lecter became both in the books and the movies is truly a creation of Thomas Harris.
Mm-hmm.
There is no real world analog to Hannibal Lecter.
No,
which is why he's like the ultimate villain. Nobody can like that can truly exist in the real world. But The Tooth Fairy, based on the BTK killer, now that was Dennis Lynn Rader, who killed at least 10 people in Kansas from the late 1970s to the early 1990s. He was a real monster, a sexual predator as well, and also Cub Scout leader and the leader of his Christian church council, of course. Just a great guy. In between his kills, he liked to dress up as his victims to pretend he was them. And his daughter described her upbringing as relatively normal. He is still alive and in jail.
Wow.
Now, the BTK killer is unique in that he named himself. He actually wrote so many letters to the newspapers. He was really wanted to be known. He wrote poems to the newspapers. He taunted them. And the only reason he got caught in the end was by 2004, the case had gone cold, and he just started making calls to the newspaper and to the local news stations, like over and over and over again.
My address is...
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
And they caught him because he was like constantly throwing it out there and taunting them. So, you know, the Kansas's finest got the BTK killer, but then that was happening around the same time that Thomas Harris was writing Red Dragon, and it's what inspired him to come up with the Tooth Fairy.
Yeah. Another fictional serial killer was created by Bret Eaton Ellis, 1991's American Psycho.
Oh, we're talking old Patrick Bateman.
Yeah, so
Hey, do you
the
like Phil
story is
Collins?
told... What's that?
Do you like Phil Collins?
The story is told in the first person by Patrick Bateman.
Yeah.
He's wealthy. He's a narcissist. He's an investment banker who lives in Manhattan, and his double life is as a serial killer.
Oh, yeah. A very creative serial killer.
Yes. And the film adaptation of this novel stars Christian Bale as Patrick Bateman and was
so good.
released in the year 2000.
That was like his second breakthrough.
Yes.
You know, he had his breakout role as a child with Empire of the Sun, and then his breakout role...
He was also in Newsies.
No, I know, but that was like his he was younger in Empire of the Sun.
Yeah.
And then his adult breakout role was American Psycho, for sure. That's when he like just exploded onto the scene.
And it was directed by Mary Harron.
Yeah, who demanded Christian Bale. The studios were pushing hard for Leonardo DiCaprio, who, listen, probably would have been great
at that age, especially.
I'm sure he would have done a really great job, but Christian Bale, oh man, what a transcendent role for him.
Yeah. The music is great. The cinematic quality of how the color, the cinematography plays out is it's very like his killing rooms are hospital. They're very sterile.
Very anesthetic. Yes. And it shows like the absolute void and emptiness of his life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it is at its core like a very dark comedy.
Well, that's the thing is the spoiler alert for a 30-year-old book and a 20-year-old movie, but he's not actually a serial killer.
Right.
He's just a possibly schizophrenic, highly delusional narcissist.
But those are serial murders.
Yes. What's depicted on the screen and in the book, now, trigger warning, the movie's pretty violent. The book is 100 times worse.
Very violent.
Holy shit. There are things in that book that I can never unthink about, but would like to. Bret Easton Ellis has a dark, dark mind. And he's opinionated in a way that not everyone loves.
Yeah.
Let's just put that out there. But this movie, it is a parody. It is a dark comedy.
It is.
And,
very dark.
You know, it's pretty explicit at the end that this is all in his mind. Mm-hmm. But there are still a lot of people that don't seem to get that fact.
Right.
And it's a little frustrating.
One other mention I wanted to say about in books specifically, and some film adaptations as well, are the James Patterson books, specifically about the character Alex Cross.
Yeah, his main guy.
There's about 30
long series.
Alex Cross books from 1993 through 2022, the last one. came out in 2022.
Some of those were even written by James Patterson himself.
I don't know if it's the last one of Alex Cross. I believe that I heard something that Alex Cross is like no longer going to be a character, but I'm not sure.
Who knows?
But
I've not read those books.
No, but there are 30 of them, so that's like in a retirement plan.
Oh yeah,
yeah, maybe.
Oh, is it? Tell me, you should say this on air because you told me this the other day, and I didn't know this.
So for all of you that are new to this podcast, I really like to read. And there are so many books that are like on my to read pile, but I have a plan for when I'm retired that I am going to go through all of the Sue Grafton murder mystery books.
A for arson. Is that one? That sounds like. B for butchery.
It's maybe A for autopsy.
C for cutting people.
So I'm going to read through all those, and maybe I'll add all the Alex Cross books to that list.
That is amazing. And I want the audience to know that the most likely cause of death for beloved co-host Laura is crushed under a giant pile of to-be-read books.
Oh, I'm probably going to have to read on an electronic device with like 40 font.
Listen, as someone who commutes a long commute every single day, I love an audiobook. It really takes the sting out of a long drive.
Speaking of a long commute, one of the books of James Patterson that was made into film was Along Came a Spider.
Wow. That's fantastic.
Which is really, listen, I'm going to tell you, it doesn't hold up. But Kiss the Girls, another Alex Cross book, does.
That was the first one, right?
Yeah.
With Morgan
the first movie, but not the first book.
No, but Morgan Freeman was Alex Cross for 2 movies.
Yes.
And it's because Along Came a Spider kind of bombed that they didn't keep going with it.
Right. Kiss the Girls came out first.
This was like the awesome time in Morgan Freeman's career where he was playing like a lot of detective roles because he was in his like mid 40s, late 40s.
Yeah, and Ashley Judd gets fucked up, and it's almost like prescient.
I like
because she has got fucked up in real life.
I
that
know.
Poor thing.
I really liked Ashley Judd's character in Kiss the Girls because she is like an unstoppable, relentless Terminator revenge machine who like bodily throws herself in harm's way to stop. It's amazing. And she's like really intense.
It's great.
Yeah.
So I think we should take a break. And when we come back, I'll talk about some books to TV shows.
And I'll talk about some movies to movies.
Oh, wait. Before we break,
okay.
I did want to talk about Hannibal, the TV show.
Oh, gosh.
Before we move on from
best.
Hannibal,
So
I know
good.
we already did. Can we cut this back in?
No, I mean, just do it now. You know?
All right. So
we're people.
Hannibal, TV Hannibal.
Yeah. 3 seasons.
Again, it's sort of like Hannibal and Will Graham go together. Dr. Lecter and Will Graham go together really well, like peanut butter and blood. So Mads Mikkelsen plays Hannibal in the TV adaptation.
Yeah.
And Hugh Dancy plays Will Graham, and it is extraordinary.
Primo. Brian Fuller.
If you only
show.
watch or read or like, I can only handle one iteration of Will Graham and Hannibal, please watch the TV show Hannibal. Please.
Also Silence of the Lambs, but Will Graham's not in that one.
No, but if you can only choose one.
Yeah, I guess. I would say, Silence of the Lambs. It would be my
wow.
pick. Yeah.
I would say the TV show Hannibal.
No, for sure.
You'll never want to go to sleep
You're
again.
asking me an impossible
It's also
question.
scarier than Silence of the Lambs.
Listen, you know what? Both can exist.
They
You're
can.
all my favorites. I love you all equally.
Who do you like better of this podcast, me or my co-host? That's where
you, obviously.
So then watch Hannibal.
Oh.
And let's take a break.
Ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba.
Do-do-do-do-do-do-do. Do you have something to hide? Come on, we all do. But when the thing you want to hide is your malformed, damaged, or deranged face, then have we got the product for you. At Michael Myers Mask Mongers, we have the fit and flair that will cover your most grotesque facial deformity. If you want to cover the thing of nightmares with something that inspires, well, new nightmares, head to one of our monger mills and choose the right mask for your reign of terror. Ghost-faced, clown-inspired, cherubic, or sport-themed masks, you have your choice of over 1,000 options. With our quadruple M guarantee, you will be delighted to inspire fear in everyone you encounter and maintain your own horrific anonymity. This is a fake ad for a fake product on a horror-themed podcast. We do not condone nor endorse murder of any kind, no matter how cool your mask looks.
And we're back.
So I'm going to just go through a couple of books that have become TV shows, very popular right now.
Are they about serial killers?
Yes.
Oh, good. Then that fits.
So the book You by Carolyn Kep.
That was a book first?
Kepnes, yes.
I didn't know that.
And so it's a Netflix TV series starring Penn Badgley as the main serial stalker and killer, Joe. And then Darkly Dreaming Dexter by Jeff Lindsay.
That one I get.
And the Dexter TV show that ran for multiple seasons on Showtime, starring Michael C. Hall as
and
Dexter.
3 of them were good.
The reboot was good. I thought it was good. It
was fine.
And just a note about Dexter, if you guys haven't heard of the show, Dexter Morgan is very charming. He lives in Miami. But he's a serial killer that only kills bad people.
He takes his talents to South Beach.
Yes. He's a blood spatter expert in the Miami Police Department. And so that puts him in the perfect position to find his victims.
Now
so he feels like he's doing, he's able to control his predilection for murder.
What he calls the dark passenger.
Yeah, by focusing on those who deserve to be killed.
Yeah, so it's like a real morally gray area where he's murdering because he has an impulse to murder, but he's only murdering murderers.
Right.
So
it's a complicated web in which he weaves.
Yeah.
For us as the viewer as well.
It's like spiders, basically.
Because you do root for him, because Michael C. Hall is an incredible actor.
Oh, yeah. That's it's hard not to. He's so charismatic. But what needed to be murdered was that show after the John Lithgow season. It just jumped the shark completely, and then went on for just 5 more seasons.
Well, we're all about positivity here, so I'm going to go into another book that hasn't been adapted into anything because it just came out in 2018. It's called My Sister, the Serial Killer, and it's by
my son,
Onikan
the chef.
Braithwaite.
What? That's a great name.
Yeah. So Cordy's sister, Oyula, is many things. She is beautiful. She's the favorite. And she's a sociopath. And now she's stabbed her 3rd boyfriend in a row. And Corday is...
1 boyfriend, I understand. 2, unlucky. 3rd boyfriend... That's a lot of stabbings.
Corday knows the best solution for cleaning blood, and so she helps keep Ayula from getting caught, essentially.
That's a good friend.
Sister.
Well, we're all sisters.
And then Corday falls in love, and Ayula steps in to take care of this love of her life that turns out to be something different than what she thought.
I mean, it sounds pretty complicated to me.
Yeah.
Yikes.
Exactly.
Wow.
But there's also
off mic. Can you tell me how to clean the blood cleaning solution? Just no. Don't ask why.
I don't know. How would I know?
Oh, I thought you had it.
No.
It doesn't matter. Anyway.
Weird.
What?
Yikes. Oh, please help me. There's games called The Evil Within that came out in October 2014, and part 2 that came out in 2017 by Tango Gameworks.
I love those games. Those are good.
Yeah,
especially the second one.
The game centers on the protagonist named Sebastian Castellanos as he's pulled through a distorted world of nightmare locations and horrid creatures. You play in a third-person perspective, and you battle disfigured nightmare enemies, including bosses, and you have to use stealth
Yeah, you
have
basically
to avoid traps.
It's a crazy game. You get pulled into the mindscape of a sociopathic serial killer, and everything is corrupted and distorted because of his dark tendencies. And it's very Lovecraftian. It's very kind of Silent Hill, but with a little bit more action. Those games are dope.
Yeah, absolutely. I now want to talk about a few movies that are fictional.
That sounds great.
Shadow of a Doubt
by old
Alfred
Freddie
Hitchcock.
Hitchcock?
Yeah.
Wow.
1943.
Can I tell you something?
Yeah.
I met Teresa Wright.
Oh, wow. She played the niece of the murder in here.
When I was like 19, I think, I went to an Alfred Hitchcock, like a lecture at a local university, and I got to meet Teresa Wright and Tippi Hedren.
Wow.
It was really cool. Yeah.
So Shadow of a Doubt follows a serial killer named the Merry Widow Murderer. His name is Charlie Oakley, and he's played by Joseph Cotton.
Yeah, which is, for any viewer under 80, that's against type for Joseph Cotton.
Yeah,
didn't normally play this kind of role, and he does so brilliantly.
Teresa Wright plays his niece, and she starts to suspect him. And there's also a discussion of how to commit the perfect murder in this film, and also a theme of some Hitchcock.
Yeah.
And yeah, he's a suspect on the police's search, and he's a killer of many women. So that's an oldie but a goodie. There's a couple of versions of the next film I'm going to mention, which is Funny Games. The killers of Peter and Paul.
Michael Haneke's Funny Games.
Michael Haneke, which was Austrian in 1997. And then there was an American version in 2007.
Yeah, he was one of several directors who remade his own movie.
Yep. They're psychological thrillers. They follow two men that torture and murder families on holiday.
And terrorize.
Peter and Paul
they're
were
killers.
Yes, exactly. Peter and Paul were played by Arno Frisch and Frank Gehring in the original 1997, and Brady Corbett and Michael Pitt in the remake.
Yeah, it's also, they're very meta textual films. I can't talk about it without giving away the major twist of the movie,
right.
But there's a moment where it's like, what?
Yes.
Where everything changes, and they were very controversial, both versions, honestly, because it depicts a lot of youth violence. The characters are terrifyingly amoral and psychopathic, and they're tricky films. There's a lot of psychological torture and a physical torture, and they're famous for that. So I recommend the original over the remake, although the remake is also very good. It's got Tim Roth and Naomi Watts in it. They're both worth a watch.
Yes. I wanted to also mention a couple of just a TV show. Another TV show called The Fall, with a fictional serial killer named Paul Spector, played by Jamie Dornan.
Oh, right. I remember that one.
Yep.
Sure.
And Gillian Anderson, or Gillian Anderson, and however she pronounces her name, she plays Detective Sergeant Inspector Stella Gibson.
Yeah.
And it's a British-Irish TV crime drama.
This is why she gives interviews with an accent now, basically.
And Jamie Dornan is incredible in it. And
like if all you've ever seen is 50 Shades of Grey, he can act.
Yes.
Those were just badly written.
Yes, he can, and that was really good. And it's a weird juxtaposition of Jamie Dornan's attractiveness and evilness in the film.
That's the other thing, like with you as well. Penn Badgley is arguably a pretty good looking guy. And
he's got a great brain.
You've got these human monsters that don't look like monsters.
Right.
Wolves in sheep's clothing, so to speak.
Correct.
Yeah.
Which I would say, even though these are fictional serial killers, probably harken back to the most charismatic of all serial killers, Ted Bundy.
Yes, who was a very good-looking guy who had got his victims to drop their guard because he was a well-dressed, good-looking white man.
And drop their pants.
I mean, seriously, that
was a bum.
Yeah, it was preying on the sort of ingrained prejudices that we all have of like, well, he doesn't look like a killer.
No, and he would be like, can you help me find my dog? So you want to jump into fictional representations of real serial killers?
I've got a couple of examples, yeah. So I'm going to talk about... okay, so this is another one from 1986, along with Manhunter. Now, personally, 1986 was a big year for me. It's one of the first years that I have like real memories of. And
of killing?
No. Well, yeah, I did kill my first person in 1986.
Oh, come on. You can't say that on air.
As a 6-year-old. But it's like the first year I have like real cohesive memories of. You know, the Mets won the World Series, so like my grandpa went nuts. My parents took me to Disney World that year, and the Challenger exploded. So it's a year that like really sticks in my mind. But anyway, the second 1986 movie I'm going to talk about is Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, directed by John McNaughton, who went on later to direct Wild Things, which had Neve Campbell, Denise Richards, and was it Kevin Bacon's wiener? Or was it Matt Dillon's penis?
Matt Dillon.
It was Matt Dillon? I think, were there multiple penises?
No, but apparently Matt Dillon and Kevin Bacon were supposed to have a sex scene together.
A peen-off?
And one of them said no.
Oh, but we don't know
And
who?
it wasn't Kevin Bacon.
Oh, yeah. Honestly, that makes sense. I feel like Kevin Bacon would be totally up for it. Get it?
Yeah. So who's the serial killer then?
Anyway, this was directed by John McNaughton. So this is based on the real-life serial killing duo of Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Toole. Now, Lucas killed 3 people, including his mom. But while he was incarcerated, he confessed to over 600 murders. Oof. Becoming the most prolific serial killer in history. And the Texas Rangers loved him because they could close all sorts of cases. Now, here's the thing. They didn't look too deeply into anything he said because he was lying about fucking all of it. He did kill 3 people. That's what he was in jail for. But while he was in jail, he and his buddy Otis bullshitted the Rangers. It did a lot of damage to their reputation, and they had to go back and reopen a lot of cases. This ended up really, really hurting a lot of people because victims were given closure, their families and whatnot. That wasn't real. But just great police work, everybody. So the Dallas Times Herald, shout out to the journalists who were the ones who did a little digging and discovered that Henry Lee Lucas was full of shit. Now, the movie Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer is dark. It's an incredible movie. It's the debut of John McNaughton. It's also the debut of Michael Rooker, who you might know from everything, but he plays Yondu in Guardians of the Galaxy. Now, Michael Rooker plays Henry as an absolute dead-eyed, cold butcher. It's a dark, grimy, greasy, nasty movie that does not romanticize the killer. He's not Mads Mikkelsen wearing a suit and charming his way as he kills. Henry is a piece of shit who lives a piece of shit life with his piece of shit buddies. Michael Rooker plays Henry. Tracy Arnold plays Becky, who is Otis's sister, was played by Tom Towles. Now there's Otis is a kind of a minion to Henry. They get in a lot of fights with each other. There's a incestuous sexual relationship sort of going on. I don't want to talk too much about it. It's bleak, it's grimy, it's masterfully acted by Michael Rooker. It's a movie that if you are really interested in serial killers and you are not of the faint-hearted, I definitely recommend it. But if you're a more casual horror fan, I would recommend staying away from this one because it does get pretty intense. Now, the ending is just magnificent. It is a real banger of an ending. And one thing that I truly do admire about this film, which has gone on to become a cult classic, is it in no way romanticizes murdering people. It really shows serial killers to be monsters. Mm-hmm. And you know, there's no empathy for Michael Rooker's character, and he does not play him as a sympathetic character. He's not like doing it for a reason that you can get behind or any sort of, he's not a charismatic character that you want to succeed. And yet, anyway, it's a great movie. I totally recommend it if that's your thing.
Want to talk about another real serial killer? How about Ed Gein?
I was going to talk about Ed Gein.
I know.
Oh, great.
So imagine a, pretty socially awkward mama's boy, sexually repressed hoarder who likes to dig up corpses and create housewares and fashion like cereal bowls from skulls and belts made from nipples.
Yes. Now, I did a lot of research into Ed Gein, and one of the conclusions I came to for the pod was I can't read the list of things that they found in his house, even on this podcast.
Oh.
It is too much even for me.
I was going to read it.
Holy shit, really?
Well, I was going to mention some of them.
Well, let's talk about Ed Gein for a little bit.
Yeah,
and then
I want to.
We can get there.
Only 2 deaths are actually attributed to him.
Yes.
Which tavern
does
owner
that
Mary
even
Hogan.
make him a serial killer?
Yes.
It has to be 2 or more?
2 or more.
Okay. So he's just
occasions.
barely a serial killer.
Tavern owner Mary Hogan in 1954 and Bernice Warden, a Plainfield hardware store owner in 1957, which also gave him the moniker of the Plainsville Ghoul.
Also called the Butcher of Plainsfield.
Right.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until he murdered Bernice that police started to pay attention, because he had been doing like digging up graves and, hoarding and collecting all these body parts. So her
for a
son,
long time.
Frank, yeah.
According to Gein himself, he made at least 30 trips to the cemetery.
Her son, Bernice's son, Frank, told investigators that Gein had been into the hardware store the evening before his mother's disappearance, and they found like a sales slip of his, and he was meant to return to pick up a gallon of antifreeze the next morning. So the police picked him up at a grocery store, and then they went to his farm where they found the remains of Bernice Warden. And then they found a lot of other things. This is a trigger warning. They found Bernice hung upside down by her legs with a crossbar at her ankles and ropes at her wrists. And the torso was dressed out like a deer.
Yes.
So when the police begin to search the farm, these are the list of things they found, which my co-host doesn't want to speak about.
You know what? You can just anybody who doesn't want to hear, hit that 15-second button now.
Human bones and fragments, waste baskets made of human skin covering chairs, skulls on his bedpost, bowls made from skulls, a corset made from a female torso, legs made from human skin, masks also made from skin of females, Mary Hogan's face mask in a paper bag.
So Ed Gein was...
There are some other things I'm not going to mention. There were multiple noses, some lips, lampshades that were made from a human face, and fingernails from Lots of female fingers.
Now, Ed Gein, the real person who did these things in the 1950s, was has inspired everything from Robert Bloch's Norman
I have
Bates.
a list of all these.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, just off the top of my head, Norman Bates.
Let's go.
Robert Bloch's creation.
Yeah.
Leatherface.
Yeah. So Norman Bates, Leatherface, Buffalo Bill, Dr.
Thomas
Oliver
Harris's creation.
Thredson from American Horror Story, Asylum, Hitchcock. There's a movie in 1974 called Deranged. Ed Gein film 2001.
I'm actually going to talk about that one.
House of a Thousand Corpses in 2003. The Devil's Rejects in 2005. And Ed Gein, The Butcher of Plainfield from 2007.
Now, Ed Gein, a few more things I want to talk about. He had a mission. The reason he was digging up bodies, he wasn't digging up random bodies. He was digging up recently buried middle-aged women who looked like his mom. And the reason he was doing that is because he was tanning
Mama's
them.
boy.
Yes. He was tanning them to create a people suit that he would put on his naked body and dance in the moonlight,
Which
wearing
is
the suit.
Like the
Like Buffalo Bill.
Psycho and Buffalo Bill.
Yep,
like
exactly.
A combination of the two.
Because according to him, he wanted to crawl inside his mother's skin. Literally. Now, the arresting sheriff was so haunted by what they found, he died before the trial concluded of heart failure at 43. And his wife demanded that he be listed amongst Ed Gein's murder victims because she insisted that Ed Gein had murdered him as if, as he had stabbed him.
Yeah.
So
involuntarily.
Yeah. Now, this was, in my opinion, best adapted. Obviously, we just talked about all of the inspirations, but there was a movie in 2000 directed by Chuck Perrello called Ed Gein. Now, the original movie, the title of the movie was In the Light of the Moon. I don't know if anybody remembers, but in the early 2000s, there was a brief trend of straight-to-DVD movies with one-word titles about serial killers. There was like Gacy, Bundy, Gein, So Ed Gein started out as being called In the Light of the Moon because Ed Gein liked to dance in the moon. Was played very memorably, was played quite memorably. Now, Ed Gein was wonderfully played by Steve Railsback from, you might recognize from Life Force and like a billion other things. Now, he really plays him with, Steve Railsback has a very distinct look, dark-eyed, kind of sharp features. He plays him like a real fucking creep. And the movie itself it's pretty good. It's elevated, I would say, based on the just bananas source material that is honestly so crazy you can't believe it really happened, but it did. And Steve Railsback's just wonderful performance in this movie. Now, Ed Gein is by far one of the gnarliest examples of serial killer, mostly known for what he did with bodies that he, dug out of graves. Now, he did deny all accusations of necrophilia, Ed Gein, saying that they smelled too bad, which leads me to believe that it did cross his mind.
Well, I mean, he made housewares, so
yes,
I don't know. I mean, a lot of serial murderers are pathological liars as well, so.
Like Henry Lee Lucas. So serious weird fact that I learned researching this, because I've seen all these movies. Ed Gein, directed by Chuck Perrello, as I mentioned, who also directed the sequel to Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer that I didn't know existed because it's got a completely different cast and Michael Rooker's not in it and blah, blah, blah. I've never seen it because I didn't know it existed. But yeah, Ed Gein directed sequel to Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer. I can't recommend that because I haven't seen it, but I do still recommend the original.
Another is Richard Ramirez. So
yikes, the Night Stalker.
Yes, the Night Stalker. Lou Diamond Phillips played him in the Night Stalker film. It centers around Ramirez and his confession to the murder of another man that he's been sentenced to death for. The film takes place in the 80s in California, and Ramirez was later apprehended in 1985, and he had allegedly murdered more than 15 people and was convicted of killing 13 and sexually assaulting 11. But the film, starring Lou Diamond Phillips, is pretty violent, and it shows like very disturbed representation of Ramirez. And I think it's a pretty interesting, quiet, unknown film.
Yeah, it's a sleeper for sure. But I remember that one. It's a good one.
The next that I want to talk about is Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer.
Yikes.
He was a killer and sex offender who killed and dismembered 17 men and boys between 1978 and 1991.
Yeah, one of the just worst out there. And like of our lifetime, I really remember like the trial, and then you got, all of this happening when I was a kid is a big deal.
There are a few like representations fictionally of Jeffrey Dahmer. Exquisite Corpse is a novel by Poppy Bright.
Yikes. That's a hardcore one. Just to let you know, Poppy Z. Bright writes graphic stuff.
My Friend Dahmer by Durf Backdorf is a graphic novel and a film from 2017.
The movie's really good. It's a slow kind of character study of a pre-murder Dahmer, like before he killed anyone. But you sort of get in the sense that he might be that kind of person.
And the Netflix series Dahmer, starring Evan Peterson, that just came out this past year.
Right. It really looks like him too.
One of my favorite representations is the novel Zombie from 1995, written by my beloved Joyce Carol Oates.
Yes. What a book.
She said it's based on Jeffrey Dahmer. The protagonist of the book, his name is Quentin P. And he is looking to basically create a zombie out of unsuspecting young men and find his perfect male companion and try to change his brain by turning the victim into a sex slave.
Yeah, one of Dahmer's proclivities was experimentation.
Yes.
In a sort of Joseph Mengele type way. But the novel Zombie focuses quite specifically on his pursuit, on this one pursuit.
And his process. His
it's
process of
barbaric.
Doing improvised surgery on brains.
The stuff he uses.
Mostly ending in failure. I mean, always ending in failure,
yes.
I would say.
Yes.
He rapes and tortures them. And by the end of the novel, he just pretty much enjoys doing what he's doing. He's sort of embraced his full transformation into this killer.
Yeah, it's one of the darkest books I've ever read in my life, for sure.
Yes.
For sure.
And his family is suspicious, and his father specifically, but, it's sort of the question of, because it is told from Quentin P's perspective, like you're really in his mind, it's really about how he can stay ahead of everybody's suspicions.
Now, I mean,
giving them just a little here and there.
Dahmer is also a very unfortunate mirror to hold up to our, prejudices and our justice system, because he was a white man who predominantly preyed on victims of color, on minorities. Quite famously, one escaped, ran to the police, and was brought back to Jeffrey Dahmer by the police. Dahmer, being a normal-looking white guy, convinced them that everything was fine, and they left the young man with the man he had escaped from, who then killed him. Mm-hmm. So imagine that, escaping from your killer, and then you are brought back there by the police to be killed.
Yeah.
Great job, everybody. Great job, everybody.
I know that the TV show Dahmer also focuses on a specific neighbor of his that really pushes the law enforcement to step in.
Yikes.
Well, you mentioned the Zodiac Killer, so let's just jump to him or her or them or
Never caught.
Whoever.
Never caught.
Yeah, the Zodiac Killer is the
currently
pseudonym
serving as
of an unidentified serial killer.
Well, I mean, or currently serving as junior senator from Texas.
It's not Ted Cruz.
Well, could be. Feels like it might be.
He operated primarily in Northern California in the 60s, and it's the most unsolved murder case in American history.
Yeah, he wrote letters in code to the newspapers that were uncrackable.
Yes. The Zodiac Killer is known to have murdered 5 victims in San Francisco, and he typically targeted young couples and male cab drivers. There are more claims that there are more than 35 victims out there, and lots of cold cases have also been attached to the potential of this still unapprehended or unknown killer. He wrote in ciphers, cryptogram ciphers.
Yeah,
some of them were just cracked. Some of them were just cracked in 2020. The serial killer in the film Dirty Harry was modeled after the Zodiac Killer.
Serpico.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Scorpio.
Yeah.
Scorpio.
Yeah, he was played by that guy from Hellraiser.
Yeah, that came out in 1971.
Yeah.
And a lot of copycat killers based on the killer in Dirty Harry happened as well.
Yes, Don Siegel directed Dirty Harry. We've mentioned Don Siegel before in our Invasion of the Body Snatchers episode because he directed the original in that and had a cameo in the remake. But yeah, he took a lot of heat for Dirty Harry because it was done at the same time as the Zodiac Killer. It was set in San Francisco, and he was accused of kind of exploiting real-life tragedy, which is a fine line you have to walk and consider, I think, as a consumer of this sort of culture. Like, are you gaining enjoyment by exploiting the very real tragedies that occurred to real people? Is this because you're fascinated, or is this how you unwind? It's a murky gray area, honestly. I think there is a way to be respectful of the people that went through these things. But on the other hand,
sometimes you have to talk about it in order for these folks to get caught.
Yeah, absolutely. But I'm talking more of like, literally watching movies based on Ed Gein and being like, this movie's awesome and I enjoyed it and had a good time. And the impetus for it was a real killer. That's definitely a murky area. I don't think there is a good answer for it. I just think it's important to acknowledge.
The Zodiac Killer was also written about by Robert Graysmith. And Robert Graysmith started out as a cartoonist, but later turned into a true crime author and is best known for his work on the Zodiac Killer, of which was made into a film by David Fincher in 2007. And Robert Graysmith was played in the film by Jake Gyllenhaal. So again, to your point that sometimes you need to write about these real killers and real victims in order to start to unearth some of the connections.
There's journalism for sure, but I'm talking more about, making a movie and then making a profit off of that movie.
Sure.
It's just important to acknowledge, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, there is a disconnect between profiting off of a movie based on a killer rather than making money to assist in victims of that killer or
does life
imitate
art? Does art imitate life?
Crimes.
Are you responsible for how people perceive your movie? Are you responsible if somebody watches what you created and takes inspiration from it? I don't know. These are all just interesting questions, I think. But that's
Zodiac,
a lot
though,
of serial killing.
Yeah. David Fincher's Zodiac, though, is an unsung film. I don't think it's as well loved as it deserves to be.
It requires, it's a movie I liked better the second time I watched it, because if you're going into it with the expectation that it's like Seven or, something like that, it's a slower paced and
There's
and
no
more
resolution.
Yes, it's frustrating because there is no proper resolution or denouement, because in real life there wasn't either. But it's a great, tight, well-acted movie. I say like kind of more along the lines of All the President's Men. It's like investigative journalism type thriller.
I wanted to mention just Charles Manson because I know a lot of people think about Manson. Helter Skelter. He essentially got that name from that Beatles song, and then there was a film named Helter Skelter.
Oh, it was a book. Victor Bugliosi wrote Helter Skelter.
Yeah, but then a film came out directed by Tom Gries in 1976. And so it gave really the rise to the Manson family known in pop culture.
Yeah, I mean, and the fact that he lived for 60 years behind or 50 years behind prison and was a pretty outspoken, wild person who carved a swastika in his forehead and married a bunch of people.
Yeah,
kept his myth going.
He's
for sure.
actually not by definition a serial killer
No.
or a murderer or killer at all, because he's never actually been convicted of murdering anyone, just of influencing his followers to kill people.
Yeah, he is culpable in directing them to murder for him.
He's now passed away. He was in prison.
And good riddance.
But there
Nazi
was
fuck.
also a film called Charlie Says in 2018 where Matt Smith played him. And it was mostly a focus on Leslie Van Houten and during her time with the Manson family. So it was like a focus on her and how she was brainwashed essentially by him. And then Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, 2019, obviously that does have the Manson family.
It gives Sharon Tate the old Inglourious Bastards treatment.
Yes.
A little revisionist history that is honestly kind of nice.
Yeah.
If only it had worked out that way.
Correct. Right.
If only
reimagining.
If only Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio had been there to, kill everybody.
And before we wrap up, I know you can tell by most of the serial killers we've talked about, they're white men. But I did want to mention a real serial killer that was fictionalized in the film Monster, written and directed by Patty Jenkins, starring Charlize Theron, that looks at Eileen Wuornos. She was somebody who, and this is something that if you know anything about serial killers, they have really tough upbringing, tough lives.
That's
an
often
initiating
a commonality.
incident, a abusive incident, a pattern of abuse, something that breaks them.
Oh yeah, Aileen Wuornos had a horrible life.
And she was a prostitute, and she basically slaughtered 7 men between the years 1989 and 1990.
That is a lot of people in a short amount of time.
Yes.
Wow.
And it was mostly because of the violence that was inflicted upon her, both as a girl growing up, but also by men in her life. And so it was a way for her to take out her revenge and frustration and her own trauma, and played masterfully by Charlize Theron in this film.
Yeah, I think she won the Oscar for that one, right? So yeah, that, man, it's obviously it's a big subject. We really, really only touched on a very few examples, but it's an interesting subject, and I really want to stress that it's one that over the years I've struggled with for sure. Being interested in or fascinated by, and then asking myself does that say something about me? And I've come to the conclusion it really doesn't. It's perfectly fine to have a curiosity into things that are darker, that are maybe so outside your own realm of experience that by their existence they fascinate you because you can't really even imagine that being a part of your life, or you want to learn more about it because it is so alien to you and therefore of interest. It's just human nature.
I think I come at it as a approach of not being naive of what people are capable of, but also sort of arming myself with the knowledge that, you know, you need to be in a condition when you're out in the world of awareness and of what's around you and what is possible.
Ghostface is everywhere.
Ghostface is actually
everywhere.
Ghostface is actually inspired by a real serial killer. Just to FYI.
Yeah, they usually are. Well, I hope you enjoyed it. Kind of dark episode this week.
I feel like they all are because this is a horror themed podcast.
I keep forgetting that.
But yeah, we hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you have a great time either watching, reading, or not actually doing any.
Can't stress that enough.
Yeah.
Hope you enjoy your time not killing people.
Exactly.
Bye, everybody.
Terror in Tandem is written, produced, and recorded by Laura and Richard Mathiasen, and edited and mixed by Richard Mathiasen. Our theme was written and performed by Carrie Denver, and all other music was written and performed by David Suspanic. All opinions expressed on this podcast are our own and should be taken as such. Thanks for listening, and please remember to give us a like, a review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. See you next time. We're